Owen W. Scott's article, Gender, a Useful Category of Historical Analysis, published in the American Historical Review in 1986, is a seminal work that has had a profound impact on the field of gender studies and historical analysis. In this essay, Scott argues that gender should be seen not merely as a term describing the biological differences between men and women but as a crucial category for historical analysis that can reveal deeper social, cultural, and political dynamics. Key points of the article. Definition of gender. Scott defines gender as a social construct, distinct from biological sex. Gender involves the social meanings assigned to differences between the sexes and the way these meanings shape social interactions and institutions. Gender as a category of analysis. Scott advocates for the use of gender as a critical analytical tool that can uncover the power relations embedded in historical narratives. She emphasizes that gender is not just about women or femininity but involves the relationships between men and women and the roles they play in society. 4 key aspects of gender. Symbols and representations, how gender is symbolically represented in cultural and social contexts, including language, images, and ideologies. Normative concepts, the social norms and expectations associated with gender, such as masculinity and femininity, and how they are constructed and maintained. Social institutions and organizations, the ways in which institutions, such as the family, the state, the economy, and education, are gendered and how they perpetuate gender norms. Subjective identity, how individuals understand and experience their own gender identity within the constraints and possibilities offered by their social and historical context. Challenges to traditional historical analysis. Scott critiques traditional historical analysis for often neglecting the importance of gender. She argues that incorporating gender into historical analysis can challenge established narratives and offer new insights into power dynamics and social change. Impact on historiography. The article has influenced a wide range of disciplines, encouraging historians and scholars to rethink the ways in which they understand and study the past. It has led to a greater emphasis on the roles of women and gender relations in historical research and has opened up new avenues for exploring issues of power, identity, and social structures. Conclusion. Scott's Gender, a Useful Category of Historical Analysis, is a foundational text that has reshaped the field of historical analysis by highlighting the importance of gender as a central category of analysis. It has encouraged scholars to consider how gender shapes historical processes and has led to more nuanced and inclusive historical narratives. Simplified definition. Gender as a historical category. Definition. Gender is not just about biological differences between men and women. It is a social construct that shapes how people understand roles, behaviors, and identities in society. Purpose. Using gender as a tool in historical analysis helps uncover deeper social, cultural, and political dynamics. Key features. Symbols and representations. Gender is expressed through symbols and representations, such as language, images, and ideologies. Example. Consider how advertisements from the 1950s depicted women primarily as homemakers and men as breadwinners. These images reflect and reinforce gender roles of the time. Normative concepts. Society has certain norms and expectations about what it means to be masculine or feminine. Example. The belief that men should be strong and assertive, while women should be nurturing and passive, shapes how people behave and are treated. Social institutions and organizations. Institutions like the family, education, and the workplace are structured in ways that reinforce gender roles. Example. In many cultures, boys are often encouraged to pursue careers in science and technology, while girls are steered towards caregiving professions. Subjective identity. How individuals perceive and experience their own gender identity within their social and historical context. Example. A woman in the early 20th century might feel conflicted about wanting a career in a male-dominated field because societal expectations were different. Simplified example. Imagine a historian studying the role of women in the workforce during World War II. By using gender as a category of analysis, the historian might explore symbols and representations, how wartime posters depicted women as strong and capable workers, which was a significant shift from earlier portrayals. Normative concepts, how societal expectations for women changed during the war, encouraging them to work in factories and offices, but reverted back after the war. Social institutions and organizations, how government policies and workplace practices either supported or hindered women's participation in the workforce. Subjective identity, how individual women experienced these changes, balancing their roles as workers and traditional expectations of being homemakers. Conclusion. By considering these aspects, historians can gain a more comprehensive understanding of how gender influences historical events and social structures. Joan W. Scott's work encourages scholars to look beyond surface-level descriptions and explore the deeper meanings and power dynamics related to gender in history. Joan W. Scott's main arguments in Gender, a Useful Category of Historical Analysis, revolve around the importance of using gender as a critical tool for understanding historical events and social structures. Here are the main arguments, along with simplified examples. Main arguments. Gender as a social construct. Argument. Gender is not just about biological differences, it is a social construct that shapes roles, behaviors, and identities. Example. In medieval Europe, women's roles were largely confined to the domestic sphere, not because of biological necessity, but because of social norms and religious beliefs that dictated their place in society. Gender as an analytical tool. Argument. Gender should be used as a central category of analysis in historical research to reveal deeper social, cultural, and political dynamics. Example. Analyzing the suffrage movement by looking at how gender roles were challenged and redefined helps understand not just the fight for voting rights, but also the broader shifts in societal attitudes towards women. 4 key aspects of gender. Symbols and representations. Gender is expressed through cultural symbols and representations. Example. World War II propaganda posters depicted women as strong and capable, Rosie the Riveter, which contrasted sharply with pre-war images of women as primarily homemakers. Normative concepts. Gender involves societal norms and expectations. Example. The expectation that men should be the primary breadwinners and women should focus on home and family life persisted even as women entered the workforce in large numbers during the Industrial Revolution. Social institutions and organizations. Gender is embedded in institutions and organizations. Example. The education system in the 19th century often offered different curricula for boys and girls, reinforcing the idea that men and women should occupy different roles in society. Subjective identity. Gender shapes individual identity and experience. Example. A woman pursuing a career in a male-dominated field like engineering in the early 20th century might face internal conflicts and societal pushback, influencing her sense of self and professional identity. Challenging traditional historiography. Argument. Incorporating gender into historical analysis challenges traditional narratives and uncovers power dynamics that are often overlooked. Example. Traditional military histories focus on battles and leaders, often ignoring the crucial roles women played as nurses, support staff, and even combatants. Including gender in these histories provides a fuller picture of wartime societies. Simplified example. Example. Women in the workforce during World War II. Symbols and representation. Wartime posters like Rosie the Riveter portrayed women as strong and essential workers. This was a significant shift from earlier images of women as primarily homemakers. Normative concepts. During the war, societal expectations for women shifted. Women were encouraged to take on jobs traditionally held by men. After the war, many were expected to return to domestic roles, illustrating the fluidity and social construction of gender norms. Social institutions and organizations. The government and factories had to adapt to the influx of women workers by providing training and childcare, showing how institutions can change gender roles. Subjective identity. Individual women experienced a mix of pride and conflict as they balanced new work roles with traditional expectations. Some women found a new sense of independence and self-worth through their work. By using gender as a category of analysis, historians can explore how these shifts influenced broader social and cultural changes, providing a more comprehensive understanding of the period. Let's delve deeper into Joan W. Scott's main arguments with additional examples to illustrate how gender can be a useful category of historical analysis. Main arguments and examples. Gender as a social construct. Argument. Gender is constructed through social processes and cultural practices, not merely biological differences. Example. In ancient Sparta, women were expected to be physically fit and involved in public life to support the military state, which contrasts with the more domestic roles of women in ancient Athens. This difference shows how gender roles are shaped by social and cultural contexts rather than biological determinism. Gender as an analytical tool. Argument. Analyzing historical events through the lens of gender can reveal power dynamics and social changes that traditional analysis might miss. Example. The French Revolution can be reinterpreted by examining the roles of women, such as their participation in the March on Versailles and the demands for political rights. This perspective highlights the revolution's impact on gender relations and the limits of its egalitarian principles. 4 key aspects of gender. Symbols and representations. Example. Victorian literature often depicted women as the angel in the house, idealizing them as pure and devoted to family. This representation reinforced domestic roles and limited women's public participation. Normative concepts. Example. The 1950s American ideal of the nuclear family, with a breadwinning father and a homemaking mother, created societal pressures that shaped gender roles and expectations, influencing policies and everyday life. Social institutions and organizations. Example. The legal system in many societies historically treated women as property or dependents of their fathers or husbands, affecting their rights to own property, vote, or work independently. This institutionalized gender inequality. Subjective identity. Example. During the women's liberation movement of the 1960s and 1970s, many women began to redefine their identities beyond traditional roles, leading to personal and societal transformations. This shift was documented in autobiographical works like Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique, challenging traditional historiography. Argument. Including gender in historical analysis challenges established narratives and brings to light the experiences and contributions of those often marginalized. Example. Traditional histories of the Industrial Revolution focus on technological advancements and economic changes. By incorporating gender analysis, historians can explore how industrialization affected women differently than men, such as the exploitation of female labor in factories and the impact on family life. Extended examples. Example. The Civil Rights Movement in the United States. Symbols and representations. Civil rights activism often highlighted male leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. However, women played crucial roles, and analyzing their contributions through gender reveals the movement's complexity. Normative concepts. The movement challenged societal norms not just about race but also about gender. Women like Rosa Parks and Ella Baker were pivotal, yet their contributions were often framed within existing gender norms. Social institutions and organizations. Women faced intersectional discrimination based on both race and gender. Understanding this helps explain the different strategies and focuses within the movement, such as the fight for both racial equality and gender justice. Subjective identity. African American women developed a sense of identity that combined their roles as activists with their experiences of gendered racism, which influenced their activism and leadership styles. Example. The role of women in colonial India. Symbols and representations. Colonial narratives often depicted Indian women as oppressed and in need of saving by British rule. This justified colonial intervention under the guise of moral superiority. Normative concepts. British colonial rule imposed Victorian gender norms on Indian society, affecting everything from education policies to legal systems, which altered traditional gender roles and family structures. Social institutions and organizations. The colonial legal and educational systems reinforced gender hierarchies. For instance, the introduction of English education for women aimed to produce educated wives and mothers rather than independent individuals. Subjective identity. Indian women navigated and resisted these imposed roles, as seen in the lives of figures like Rani Lakshmibai, who led a rebellion, and social reformers like Savitribai Phule, who worked for women's education and rights. Conclusion. Joan W. Scott's arguments emphasize the importance of recognizing gender as a central category of historical analysis. By doing so, historians can uncover hidden power dynamics, challenge traditional narratives, and gain a deeper understanding of how societal changes impact different groups. This approach enriches historical research by providing a more nuanced and comprehensive view of the past. Let's explore Joan W. Scott's main arguments in greater depth, providing more examples to illustrate how gender can serve as a useful category for historical analysis. Main arguments and expanded examples. Gender as a social construct. Argument. Gender is created through social interactions, cultural practices, and institutions, rather than being determined solely by biology. Example. In medieval Europe, the concept of chivalry defined the roles of men and women. Men were expected to be knights, upholding honor and protecting women, while women were seen as virtuous and needing protection. These roles were socially constructed and reinforced through literature, law, and daily practices. Gender as an analytical tool. Argument. Using gender as an analytical tool reveals the power structures and social changes that traditional analysis might overlook. Example. In the study of the Renaissance, traditional histories often highlight male artists and thinkers like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. A gender analysis reveals the contributions of women like Artemisia Gentileschi, whose work challenged gender norms and highlighted issues such as sexual violence and women's agency. 4 key aspects of gender. Symbols and representations. Example. In ancient mythology, figures like Athena and Aphrodite represented different aspects of femininity, wisdom and warfare versus love and beauty. These symbols influenced how women were perceived and treated in ancient Greek society. Normative concepts. Example. During the Victorian era, the concept of separate spheres dictated that men belonged in the public sphere, work, politics, and women in the private sphere, home, family. This ideology shaped social policies and personal behaviors. Social institutions and organizations. Example. The Catholic Church's teachings on gender roles significantly influenced medieval and early modern European societies, dictating behaviors, family structures, and even legal codes, such as the prohibition of women from holding clerical positions. Subjective identity. Example. In the early 20th century, many women in the Western world began to challenge traditional gender roles through the suffrage movement. This shift influenced the personal identities, as they saw themselves not just as wives and mothers but as citizens with rights and agency. Challenging traditional historiography. Argument. Incorporating gender into historical analysis challenges established narratives and uncovers the experiences and contributions of those often marginalized. Example. Traditional histories of the American West focus on male pioneers and cowboys. A gender analysis reveals the crucial roles women played, such as managing households on the frontier, contributing to community building, and sometimes participating directly in pioneering and homesteading activities. Extended examples. Example. The Enlightenment and gender. Symbols and representations. Enlightenment thinkers like Rousseau wrote about the natural roles of men and women, often depicting women as suited to domestic life and men to public life. These ideas were disseminated through literature, philosophy, and art. Normative concepts. Enlightenment ideals promoted education and rationality, but often excluded women from these pursuits, reinforcing the notion that women were inherently less capable of rational thought. Social institutions and organizations. Educational institutions were largely closed to women, and the legal systems in many countries reinforced women's dependency on their fathers or husbands, limiting their ability to participate fully in public life. Subjective identity. Women like Mary Wollstonecraft challenged these norms, arguing for women's rights and education, thus reshaping their identities and roles in society. Example. The role of women in the French Revolution. Symbols and representations. women were symbolically represented in revolutionary propaganda, such as the figure of Marianne, symbolizing liberty and reason. However, these representations often masked the limited practical roles available to women. Normative concepts. The revolution's call for liberty, equality, fraternity was initially gendered, excluding women from full participation in the new political order. Women's clubs and political participation were often suppressed. Social institutions and organizations. The revolutionary government initially granted some rights to women, such as divorce, but later rolled back many of these gains. The Napoleonic Code reasserted patriarchal control. Subjective identity. Women like Olympe de Gouges, who wrote the Declaration of the Rights of Woman and of the Female Citizen, asserted their rights and redefined their identities within the revolutionary context, challenging the exclusionary practices of the time. Example: gender and colonialism. Symbols and representations. Colonial narratives often depicted indigenous women as either exotic and eroticized figures or as victims needing rescue by the colonizers, reinforcing colonial power dynamics. Normative concepts. Colonial powers imposed their gender norms on colonized societies, often disrupting existing gender relations and social structures. Social institutions and organizations. Missionary schools and colonial legal systems often enforced European gender roles, marginalizing women's traditional roles and knowledge in indigenous societies. Subjective identity. Colonized women navigated complex identities, balancing traditional roles with the new realities imposed by colonial rule. Some, like Queen Nzinga of Ndongo and Matamba, actively resisted colonial powers and redefined their roles within their societies. Conclusion. Joan W. Scott's arguments emphasize the transformative potential of using gender as a central category in historical analysis. By considering symbols and representations, normative concepts, social institutions and organizations, and subjective identity, historians can uncover the intricate ways in which gender shapes and is shaped by historical events. This approach not only enriches our understanding of the past but also highlights the diverse experiences and contributions of individuals who have often been marginalized in traditional historical narratives. Significance, relevance, legacy, contribution, and impact. Significance and relevance. Joan W. Scott's essay, Gender, a Useful Category of Historical Analysis, is highly significant and relevant for several reasons. Reconceptualization of gender. Scott's work redefines gender not as a fixed binary rooted in biology but as a complex social construct influenced by various factors such as culture, politics, and economics. This reconceptualization is critical for understanding how gender roles and identities are formed and maintained. Analytical tool. By proposing gender as an analytical tool, Scott provides historians and scholars with a framework to explore how gender influences historical events, social structures, and power dynamics. This approach encourages a more nuanced understanding of history. Interdisciplinary influence. Scott's ideas have transcended the field of history, influencing disciplines such as sociology, anthropology, political science, and cultural studies. Her work has paved the way for gender studies to become a vital interdisciplinary field. Legacy. Scott's essay has a lasting legacy in academic scholarship and beyond. Foundation for gender studies. Her work is foundational in the development of gender studies as an academic discipline. It has inspired countless scholars to investigate the roles and representations of gender in various contexts. Challenging traditional historiography. Scott's emphasis on gender has encouraged historians to revisit and reinterpret historical narratives, often uncovering overlooked or marginalized perspectives. Educational impact. Her essay is widely taught in university courses on gender studies, history, and social sciences, shaping the perspectives of new generations of scholars. Contribution. Scott's contributions are multifaceted. Theoretical framework. She provides a robust theoretical framework for analyzing gender, incorporating insights from social theory, cultural analysis, and feminist theory. Methodological innovations. Scott's approach introduces methodological innovations. By integrating gender analysis into historical research, encouraging historians to examine the intersections of gender with race, class, and other social categories. Advancing Feminist Scholarship. Her work significantly advances feminist scholarship by highlighting the importance of gender in understanding historical and contemporary issues. Impact. The impact of Scott's essay is profound. Scholarly work. It has influenced a vast body of scholarly work across various disciplines, leading to new research questions and methodologies centered on gender analysis. Policy and practice. Beyond academia, Scott's ideas have influenced policy discussions and practices related to gender equality, contributing to debates on women's rights, LGBTQ+ rights, and social justice. Global reach. The concepts introduced by Scott have had a global impact, influencing gender studies and feminist movements worldwide, promoting a more inclusive and comprehensive understanding of gender dynamics. About the author. Joan Wallach Scott is a distinguished historian and a pioneering scholar in the field of gender studies. Here are some key points about her career and contributions. Educational background. Scott earned her Ph.D. in history from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her academic background is firmly rooted in historical research, which she has expanded to include feminist theory and gender analysis. Academic positions. She has held prestigious positions at various institutions, including Brown University, the University of Illinois at Chicago, and the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, where she is a professor emerita. Major works. Besides Gender, a useful category of historical analysis, Scott has authored and edited numerous influential books and articles, including The Politics of the Veil, which examines the French headscarf controversy, and Only Paradoxes to Offer, French Feminists and the Rights of Man, which explores the history of feminist movements in France. Awards and honors. Scott has received numerous awards and honors for her contributions to historical scholarship and feminist theory, including the American Historical Association's Herbert Baxter Adams Prize and the Joan Kelly Memorial Prize. Intellectual influence. Scott's work is characterized by its intellectual rigor and its challenge to traditional academic boundaries. She has been a critical voice in advocating for the integration of gender analysis into mainstream historical research. Summary. Joan W. Scott's essay, Gender, a Useful Category of Historical Analysis, is a seminal work that has significantly impacted the field of gender studies and historical analysis. Her argument that gender is a crucial analytical tool has reshaped academic scholarship, challenging traditional narratives and revealing the complexities of social and cultural dynamics. Scott's contributions continue to influence scholars across disciplines, fostering a deeper and more inclusive understanding of history and society. Her legacy as a scholar and her impact on feminist theory and gender studies remain profound and enduring.